Welcome back to the podcast History of Our World. Chapter 52, Magadha.
The 6th century BC, a busy time for the world. So far in the podcast, this is the century where Judah fell to the Babylonians, Cyrus founded the Persian Empire, and the tyrant Pisistratus gave Athens a lot of agita. Now, as we delve further into South Asia, we see that religion and philosophy are going beyond the traditional Vedic framework, and that the various rulers are finding themselves unsatisfied with their current holdings. At this time, much of South Asia is populated with minor chiefdoms and tribes. Many are technically republics, and others continue with the Raja leader, who is appointed and consulted by a council. Yet by about 600 BC, there are also 16 identified kingdoms, or specifically, mah-guh-duhs. Maha means great, and Janapada means country, but literally translated means foothold of a tribe. Most of these kingdoms are centered around the Ganga River, which, in keeping with trying to pronounce things correctly, we'll say Ganga instead of Ganges. To the west, in modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, there's Cambodia and Gandhara, and in central India is the farthest southern kingdom, Asaka. Our story in this episode takes place mostly in northern and northeastern India, although I'll mention that around 540 BC, a prince from the northeastern state of Kalinga, remember that name for the next episode, becomes the first king of Sri Lanka, but he also had a reputation for being a jerk. Anyway, let's move back up north, to the area between the Ganga and the Himalayas, where the kingdom of Magadha is about to make history. Competing and surviving against 15 other kingdoms is a pretty tough job, and there's not a whole lot of recorded history prior to the 6th century about all this. Some kingdoms are just names in these books, but Magadha is different. Around 544 BC, at the current capital of Rajagriha, current-day Rajgir, a king takes the throne, the 15-year-old Bimbisara. Despite his age, he's one of those energetic, ambitious leaders, the type that gets about 5 hours of sleep and wakes up to run 2 miles while most of us keep bashing the snooze bar. He's revolutionary for the time because he has a keen interest in expanding his kingdom. Yeah, he builds his army, appoints officers and all that, but what's that quote? Amateurs study tactics, professionals study logistics? Bimbisara builds roads and implements a progressive tax system so that the wealthy pay more than the poor. Hey, it's one thing to have a nice army, but how are you going to pay for it? And how can you get them from one place to another? The Romans knew this, and so did Bimbisara. He uses his new army to first conquer the kingdom of Anga, which lay on the Ganga River Delta. A smart move. By controlling the ports, no ship could trade down south without paying a toll. Bimbisara also knew the value in diplomacy by arranging marriages with Magadha's northern and western neighbors, the kingdoms of Kosala and the Republic of Vaishali. Probably a few more with minor tribal leaders too. Also, these weren't marriages between princes and princesses, but rather himself and princesses, marrying some 500 in total. He also apparently spent quite a bit of time with Buddha, becoming a devoted follower upon meeting him, and even offering up his kingdom, but Buddha respectfully declined. Magadha continues to conquer, but perhaps in spite of, or as a result of Bimbisara's ambitions, his son Ajatashatru just can't wait to be king, and leads a quick revolt against his father. He locks Bimbisara up in a prison tower and starves him to death around 492. Buddhist tradition has this being done at the behest of Devadatta, a cousin and brother-in-law of the Buddha who was jealous of the relationship Bimbisara had with his master. Ajatashatru does the deed but feels just awful about it afterwards and seeks forgiveness from the Buddha, who in turn accepts his apology. Who's he to judge if a son starves his father to death? Yeah, well, historians seem to think that while this is an interesting side story, there's a pretty good chance it's historical whitewashing. Seems awfully convenient to blame someone else for your meteoric and despicable rise to power, no? Well, Ajatashatru is king now, and after fortifying the capital at Rajagriha, he uses the pretense of a neighboring kingdom withholding a promise of land as his casus belli. First, the Republic of Vaishali is conquered. Despite its claim of invincibility, the city fell quickly, in part due to Ajatashatru's penchant for military technology. Specifically a catapult which could fling great rocks called a mah-guh-duh, and his personal favorite, a chariot called a rathamusala, with huge curved blades or rods protruding from its wheels. Using this technology and a massive professional army at his back, Ajatashatru continues his march, conquering the kingdom of Kashi, which was ruled by his brother, and going after Kosala, ruled by a maternal uncle. Actually, during the protracted war with Kosala, Ajatashatru's cousin in the city, Virudaka, decides imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and deposes his father, the king. After that, for some reason, he goes off and pretty much wipes out the Shakya Republic. Remember them? That's the tribe Buddha came from. Yeah, well, Ajatashatru even found this to be a huge no-no and made preparations to fight. But he didn't have to. The stories say Virudaka's army was wiped out in a flash flood. Divine retribution for a vile deed. Convenient. Ajatashatru spent the next 12 years fighting around India, but during this time Buddha dies. As per his request, he was to be cremated, and then his remains, now relics, would be distributed to his closest disciples. But when armed representatives of various kingdoms showed up demanding the relics, a quick-thinking monk distributed 8 of the relics so that everyone would be happy. And now it's time for Apocrypha, the parts of history that must have been real enough to spread around for centuries, but then we hear it and go, really? Well, following Buddha's death, Ajatashatru immediately claimed that the kingdom of Magadha was the legitimate successor to his legacy. Without his dad's support of Buddha, who knows what might have happened to the peaceful prophet? Lots of people wanted him dead for preaching against the old Vedic ways, but with Bimbisara's patronage, it wouldn't be worth the tussle. Not to mention that a year after Buddha died, Ajatashatru sponsored the first Buddhist council, which set in motion the future of that religion, and he ordered monks to collect and record Buddha's sayings in the first written sutras. Those parts are all true, but it's boring, so let me tell you a different story. This tale comes to us from the 11th century AD text, the Lokapanati, which is a Pali translation of a Chinese translation of an earlier Indian text called the Lokaprajnapti, which had pretty much vanished even by that point. You with me so far? The legend goes that Ajatashatru seized all of Buddha's relics and hid them deep within a secret cave, guarded by a Bhuta Vahana Yanta, or a few, brought over from the land of Roma Visaya. Translated, it's spirit movement machines from the kingdom of the Romani, or in plain English, Roman robots. They had swords and moving parts and gears and... Look, I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens. Eventually, a later Indian emperor would find the original Roman engineer's son to deactivate the robots and collect the relics, but back to reality land. Ajatashatru dies in about 461, having conquered a fair bit of land and continuing Magadha's rise from kingdom to blossoming empire. Just as Dad would have wanted, had he not been starved to death. By controlling the Ganga, Magadha grew wealthy from all of the taxes and tolls collected from trade. Not to mention that this area of India is blessed with fertile soil, rich forests, mineral wealth, and, well, elephants for war and ivory. Ugh, I hate even mentioning that part. But whatever, I'm allowed to judge a culture that predates me by 2,500 years a little, right? Oh, Ajatashatru also sets a legacy of patricide. The 5 kings who followed him supposedly all killed their father to take the throne, including his own son, Udayabhadra. Aside from that, just about all that's known of him is that he moved the capital to Pataliputra, and that's about it. Oh, and a brief interjection here. About 50 years before Ajatashatru dies, Darius the Great of the Persian Empire spends about 3 years conquering his way through the Punjab, creating the Hindush satrapy, just to keep things in perspective. Okay, back to eastern India. In 345, the current king of Magadha is dead, from having a dagger plunged into his throat by a man named Mahapadmananda. Unlike our old friend Darius, who went to great lengths and pains to prove his right to the throne and family relation, Mahapadma made no secret of his background. As mentioned by the Greek historian Curtius, his father was actually a barber who earned just enough to eat each day, But he had a fine presence and thus gained the queen's affection. Thanks to her influence, he obtained a position of trust, too close to the sovereign. He treacherously assassinated the king, and under the pretext of assuring the protection of the royal children, he usurped the supreme authority, put the young princes to death, and begot the next king. Being the son of a barber also makes him a Sudra, the lowest caste, and Sudras are definitely not supposed to become king. This goes against the cosmic order. The Hindu Puranas remember him as the greatest of villains and destroyer of Kshatriyas. But Mahapadmananda could really care less. He raised a massive army and conquered a serious amount of land. The Magadha Empire, which could really be called the Nanda Empire at this point, stretched from Bengal in the east down to the Deccan Plateau in the south and approaching the Punjab in the west. Mahapadma was really out to turn South Asia into one united people, and his dynasty would be the one in charge. When he died in 335, or 329, the jury's out on that one, he left behind an empire loaded with treasure, an elite giant army, and numerous heirs to continue his vision. But numerous as they weren't very good at staying alive. 8 and 12 years, mention some texts, while others say only one son picked up, right where his dad left off in 329, Dhanananda. The details are minimal. Getting tired of hearing that yet? Dhanananda seems to have had a reputation for being greedy and cruel. He hoarded golden treasure. Actually, a quote attributed to him literally states, "It is proper that I should devote myself to hoarding treasure," and imposed hefty taxes on his people, which, you'd have to in order to pay for that army. Keep in mind the lowball estimates here are 200,000 infantry, 2,000 chariots, and 3,000 war elephants. Which, if these numbers sound familiar, it's because Dhanananda is the Indian emperor of whom Alexander the Great is warned about. He's called Xandrames or Agrames in Greek, and his empire is referred to as the Gangaridae. The defeated but noble King Porus respected Dhanananda's power, but could not stomach the thought of a Sudra in a position of power. Curtius again records the prevailing feeling that while he was more worthy of his father's condition than his own, he was odious and contemptible to his subjects. As unpopular as he was, he did have that massive army supporting him, and you'd need some kind of charismatic military genius to take him down. In the next episode, we'll take a look at a charismatic military genius who managed to pick a fight with Dhanananda, live to tell about it, and forge a new era for South Asia. The empire he'll create sets the stage for one even greater than he, but also puts India directly in confrontation with the successor to Alexander's failed pan-Hellenistic dream. Would he channel Bimbisara and find a diplomatic solution? Or pull an Ajatashatru and start hacking away at everything that moves? Ooh, it's suspense as we explore the empire of the Mauryans on the podcast History of Our World.